Accused of emotional infidelity, she was cheating. I used to think cheating was a big, obvious thing, like a neon sign in a dark room. You see it, and you do not need a committee meeting. Then one Tuesday my wife decided cheating was a spreadsheet category, and apparently I had been filing under it without consent. Her name is Tessa. She has the kind of smile that looks like it came with a customer service script, and she can turn a simple sentence into a courtroom closing argument. Me. I am Caleb. I fix problems for a living. I am calm in chaos. I am not dramatic, and I have a personal allergy to nonsense. The trouble started with a coworker named Marisol. She sat 2 rows over, married, 2 kids, and a laugh that could cut through a boring meeting like a warm knife through butter. We worked on the same project, the kind of project that eats evenings and weekends. And if you survive it, you either get promoted or you get eye-twitching. Marisol and I messaged about work, deadlines, files, client notes, and the occasional meme about printers being possessed. That is it. No secret lunches, no emotional diary pages, no late-night confessions, just 2 adults trying to keep a department from catching fire. But one night Tessa saw a notification pop up on my phone while it was charging. She did not say anything right away. She waited, and that should have been my first clue. Tessa never waits unless she is sharpening something. She followed me into the kitchen like she was floating, and she asked, "Who is Marisol?" I said, "My coworker. We are finishing the Milner account." "Why?" Tessa leaned on the counter and tilted her head. So casual, so rehearsed, and she said, "You are cheating on me." I stared at her like she had just accused me of stealing the moon. I said, "I am sorry, what?" She lifted her eyebrows. "You are messaging another woman. You are giving her attention. That is emotional cheating." I laughed, not a cute laugh. A real laugh that escaped before I could catch it, because it was so out of nowhere and so confident. I said, "Tessa, we are discussing inventory reports and the fact that our printer thinks paper is optional." Her face hardened. "You think this is funny?" I said, "I think it is nonsense. If talking to a coworker is cheating, then half the city is in trouble, including you every time you ask the barista how their day is going." That was the moment she decided I was the villain. She turned her voice quiet, like she was trying to sound reasonable for invisible jurors, and she said, "You crossed a boundary, and now I have to protect myself." "Protect yourself from what?" I asked. "An email thread." She did not answer directly. She just repeated, "You crossed a boundary." And that is when I realized this was not about my phone. This was about something else, something she was trying to cover with a loud, shiny story. The next morning she announced she wanted space. She said she was going to stay with her sister for a few days. She packed fast, like the bags were already mentally packed. She kissed my cheek like it was a formality, and she left me standing in the doorway holding a dish towel. I texted her once. I said, "We should talk. This is getting weird." She replied, "Do not gaslight me. You know what you did." That was the first time my marriage turned into a buzzword battle. 2 days later, she asked me to meet her at a coffee shop, public place, audience ready. She sat across from me and slid her phone across the table, and on it were screenshots, my messages with Marisol. Lines like, "Can you send the updated file?" and "Client moved the call to Thursday," and one message where I wrote, "This project is eating my soul. Please tell me you also feel like a raccoon in a suit." Tessa tapped the screen like she had discovered evidence in a crime documentary. See? Emotional intimacy. I looked at the messages, then at her, then back at the messages, and I said, "If this is intimacy, then I am in love with Microsoft Excel." She did not smile. She said, "You are mocking me. Because you are guilty." And that is when I knew this was not about my phone. This was about something else entirely. When I got home, I opened our shared laptop to pay the bills, and a calendar reminder popped up that I had never seen before. Girls' night, hotel lounge, 8 p.m., recurring, every second Thursday. I stared at it and felt clarity instead of rage, like fog lifting all at once. That night, I called my dad. He listened, then said, "When someone accuses you loudly of something small, they are often hiding something big." My phone rang an hour later. Tessa's name on the screen, and she said, "Caleb." I told my parents what you did, and I smiled. Because if she was making it public, then so was I. And I said, "Tomorrow I will tell everyone the full story." And in the silence after that, I heard the first crack in the version of events she was trying to sell. The next day felt like walking into a room where everyone had already read a headline about me and none of them had read the article. My phone kept buzzing. Missed calls from her parents. Messages from mutual friends that started with "Are you okay?" and ended with "What did you do?" Tessa had moved fast, faster than I thought she would. And that told me everything I needed to know about how confident she was in her version of reality. So I decided I would not rush. I showered, shaved, made coffee, and sat at the table like I was preparing for a presentation instead of a character trial. I called my parents first, not to complain, not to plead, just to state facts. I said, Tessa says I cheated because I messaged a coworker about work. I did not cheat. There is more to this story. My mom paused for half a second and said, Caleb, that sounds ridiculous. My dad laughed and said, if that is cheating, then your mother has been unfaithful to half the neighborhood. And just like that, I remembered where my sense of calm came from. Then I called her parents, and that was harder. Her mother answered, voice tight, already armored, and I said, I know what Tessa told you. I want to explain calmly. And I did. I told them about Marisol, about the messages, about the screenshots, about how I laughed because I genuinely thought it was a joke. There was a long silence. Then her father said, that does not sound like cheating. That sounds like working. And I could hear Tessa in the background asking what he said. Her mother sighed, not angry, just tired, and said, we will talk to her. After that, I sent one message to our group chat with friends. I said, I am being accused of cheating for work messages. If anyone wants to see them, I will show them. Transparency is free. Drama is expensive. The responses shifted fast. Question marks turned into jokes. Jokes turned into disbelief. One friend wrote, wait, so answering emails is illegal now. Another said, my boss is going to be furious. By the afternoon, the narrative had a crack in it, and Tessa felt it. She showed up at the apartment unannounced, eyes bright, smile tight, and said, why are you turning everyone against me? I said, I am not turning anyone. I am just not lying. She crossed her arms and said, you embarrassed me. And I said, no, you gambled and lost. That is different. She told me she felt betrayed. I told her feelings do not rewrite definitions. She said, you chose her over me. And I said, I chose reality over a fantasy accusation. And that was when she slipped, just a little. She said, if you had been paying more attention to me, I would not have felt so alone. And the room went quiet. Because that sentence did not belong in the argument she had been selling, I asked, calmly, alone how? She waved her hand, dismissive, and said, you know what I mean, but I did not, and she knew it. She grabbed her bag and said, I am done explaining myself to someone who refuses to take responsibility, and she left. Later that night, a friend called me quietly and said, I did not want to say this earlier, but I saw Tessa at a hotel bar a few weeks ago with a guy. They were very close. I did not think anything of it until now. I thanked him and hung up. I did not feel victorious. I felt confirmed, which is a colder feeling, the kind that does not celebrate, it just locks in. I opened my laptop again and searched that calendar reminder. Hotel lounge, 2nd Thursday. I checked my work travel history. Those were nights I had been out of town. I leaned back in my chair and laughed softly. Not because it was funny, but because the puzzle finally made sense. The accusation was not a wound. It was a smoke screen. And now that I could see through it, I knew the next phase would not be loud. It would be legal. And Tessa was about to learn that I am much calmer when I stop trying to save something that no longer exists and start protecting what does. When people imagine divorce, they picture screaming matches and slammed doors. Ours was quieter than that, which somehow made it heavier. Tessa did not come back to apologize or explain. She came back with printed articles about emotional boundaries and a tone that suggested she had been wronged by a system that refused to validate her story. She sat across from me at the dining table and said, I have decided we should separate, not because I cheated, but because you refused to admit that you hurt me. And I nodded, not in agreement, but in understanding, because at that point I realized the truth no longer mattered to her. Only control did. I said, if you want to separate, we will do it respectfully and fairly. She looked surprised, like she expected resistance, or maybe tears. Instead, she narrowed her eyes and said, so you admit you were wrong? And I smiled and said, no, I admit that arguing with someone who rewrites reality is a waste of time. And that smile bothered her more than any raised voice could have. We agreed to involve lawyers, not because I wanted a fight, but because I wanted structure, something solid where words could not be bent mid-sentence. When the paperwork started moving, she tried one last time to drag the accusation into the process. She told her lawyer that my emotional affairs should factor into the division, and her lawyer asked for evidence, and she provided. The same screenshots, the same emails, the same raccoon in a suit message, and I watched the room go still. Because even professionals have limits. My lawyer cleared his throat and said, with respect, this is not infidelity. And the mediator nodded. And that was the line she would not cross. No matter how hard she pushed, facts stayed facts. We divided everything evenly. No tricks, no hidden accounts, no revenge spending. I took the couch and the books I loved. She took the car and the dining set she picked out. And when it was over, she looked at me like she was waiting for something, an apology maybe, or a crack in my composure. But I just wished her well, sincerely, and that confused her more than anger ever could. After the divorce papers were signed, I walked out of the building and felt lighter, not happy, not yet, but unburdened. like I had been carrying someone else's story on my back and finally set it down. People asked me if I was okay, and I told them the truth. I was more than okay. I was clear. Clarity is underrated. It does not thrill you, it steadies you. I threw myself into work, not as an escape, but as a focus. I noticed problems others ignored, inefficiencies, gaps, small leaks in big systems, and I fixed them, quietly at first, then visibly. A client asked if I could consult independently, just for a small project. I said yes. Another followed, then another. And suddenly my evenings were not quiet because I was alone. They were quiet because I was building something. Tessa tried to keep tabs through mutual friends, casual questions, fake concern. I did not engage. I learned that silence is not passive. It is selective. A year passed. Then another. My consulting work turned into a firm, small, lean, profitable. I hired people who valued honesty over optics, and the irony was not lost on me. One afternoon I got a message from an unfamiliar number. "Hey, it is Tessa. Can we talk?" My first instinct was to ignore it, but curiosity won. I replied, "About what?" And she said, "I think we made mistakes, plural, carefully chosen." I stared at the screen and realized. This was not closure she wanted, it was access, and access is something you never give back to someone who tried to erase you. Not once, not ever. I agreed to meet her, not because I missed her, but because I had reached a place where the past no longer had teeth. We met at the same coffee shop where she once presented my inbox like evidence. Only this time she arrived early, smoothing the edge of her cup, watching the door. She looked different, not worse, just less certain, like someone who had been rehearsing confidence instead of living it. She smiled when she saw me and said, "You look good." And I said, "So do you." Because politeness costs nothing and I had nothing to prove. She started talking fast, about therapy, about growth, about how time changes perspective. She said she could see now how unfair she had been, how fear made her act. She never used the word cheated. She danced around it like it was a loose wire. Then she reached across the table and said, "I miss us." And that was the moment I understood the meeting. This was not accountability. It was nostalgia with an agenda. I gently moved my hand back and said, "We did not end because of misunderstanding. We ended because you chose a story over the truth." She frowned and said, "That is not fair." And I smiled because the irony was almost impressive. I said, "Fairness was offered many times. You declined it." She tried another angle. She said, "You have done so well. I am proud of you." Like she had invested in me and was now collecting interest. I said, "Thank you. I am proud of me too." She paused, recalibrating. Then she said, "I think we could try again, slowly. No pressure." I asked her one question, just one. I said, "Do you still believe I cheated on you?" She hesitated, just a second too long, then said, "I think boundaries are subjective." And that was my answer. I stood up, put a few bills on the table, and said, "I wish you well, truly, but I am not going backward to make someone else feel better about choices they refuse to own." Her voice cracked as she said my name, but I kept walking. Outside the air felt clean, like the kind of cold that wakes you up. My phone buzzed later with a long message from her, paragraphs about regret and timing and how she never stopped loving me. I did not reply, not out of cruelty, but out of clarity. Some conversations only exist to pull you back into a version of yourself you have already outgrown. That night, I sat in my apartment overlooking a city that suddenly felt like it belonged to me, and I thought about how close I had come to doubting myself, how easily a confident lie can rattle a steady person, and how important it is to laugh at nonsense before it tries to rewrite your life. I poured a drink, raised a glass to no one, and said out loud, "To knowing your worth." Then I went back to work the next morning. Because success does not wait for closure. It builds quietly while other people are still explaining themselves. Success does not arrive with fireworks. It shows up like a habit, one good decision stacked on another until one day you look around and realize your life no longer fits the old furniture. My firm grew carefully, not fast. I turned down projects that smelled wrong. I chose clients who respected boundaries because I had learned what happens when you ignore them. The irony still made me smile. The very word that had been used to accuse me became the rule that built my future. I hired a small team, people who spoke plainly and did not confuse confidence with noise. And we did well, very well. Enough that my parents started asking if I was sleeping, and my friends started asking if I was hiring. Every now and then Tessa's name would float back to me through someone else's story. She was dating, then not, working on herself, then frustrated with the world. I felt no satisfaction in that, just distance, which is the healthiest form of closure there is. One afternoon, I was invited to speak at a small industry event. Nothing glamorous, just a room of professionals and a microphone that squeaked. I talked about transparency, about how trust is built on clarity, not control. And afterward, a woman came up to me and said, "That sounded personal." I smiled and said, "Most useful lessons are." Later that night, I checked my phone and saw a message request, "Tessa again." I did not open it right away. I let it sit while I finished my dinner. That alone told me how far I had come. When I finally read it, she was more direct than before. She said she was struggling, that seeing my success made her realize what she lost, that she wanted another chance, not as before, but better. She promised honesty, growth, humility. I read it twice, not because I was tempted, but because I wanted to be sure I understood the subtext. This was not love reaching out. This was regret looking for relief. I typed a reply and deleted it, then typed another and deleted that too. Finally, I wrote something simple. I said, "I hope you find what you are looking for, but it will not be with me. Please do not contact me again." I sent it and felt no rush, no drama, just a quiet sense of alignment. I blocked the number, not as punishment, but as maintenance. Boundaries are not walls. They are doors you choose not to reopen. From that point on, my life moved forward without checking the rearview mirror. I traveled. I laughed more. I trusted my instincts without apologizing for them. People noticed the shift. They said I seemed lighter, sharper, more myself. And they were right. I had not lost a marriage. I had shed a misunderstanding about my own worth. And that turned out to be a very profitable trade. There is a strange moment that comes after you set a boundary for the last time. It is the moment when life tests whether you meant it. Mine came quietly, through a mutual acquaintance who mentioned Tessa without thinking. He said she had been asking about me again, not directly, just circling. I did not react, and that seemed to bother him more than any comment would have. He said, "You really are done." And I said, "Yes," and I meant it without effort. That was new. Work continued to expand, not explosively, but steadily, the kind of growth that lasts. I moved into a better office, still modest, but with light and space, and a view that reminded me daily that perspective matters. One evening, my assistant told me there was a walk-in visitor asking for me by name. I said to send them away, but she hesitated and said, "It is your ex-wife?" I paused, not because I was shaken, but because I was curious how far someone will go when they refuse to accept an ending. I told her I would handle it. Tessa stood in the reception area looking smaller than I remembered. She tried to smile and said, "I just needed to see you." I kept my tone calm and said, "This is not appropriate." She said she was desperate, that things had not worked out, that she had made mistakes, plural again. I asked her to leave. She said, "Just listen." I said, "No," and that word felt solid. She looked around at the office, the people, the movement, and I saw something shift in her eyes, not admiration, something closer to panic. She realized this world existed without her, and that terrified her. She said, "You owe me at least a conversation," and I said, "I owe you nothing." I walked her to the door and asked security to escort her out, not dramatically, just procedurally. Afterward, I sat at my desk and felt nothing but relief, not because I had won, but because I had protected my peace. That night, I thought about how far we had both come in different directions, how she had built her identity on a narrative that required me to be wrong, and how exhausting that must be. I slept deeply, the kind of sleep you get when there are no unfinished arguments echoing in your head. The next morning, I received an email from her, sent before she was blocked everywhere. It was long, emotional, full of apologies and explanations. I did not read past the first few lines. I archived it and moved on. Some chapters do not need a reread, they just need to stay closed. And in that moment, I understood the real victory. It was not success, not money, not even being believed. It was the ability to say no without anger and mean it. Being right does not feel the way people imagine. It is not loud. It does not clap for you. It settles in slowly and asks you to carry it with responsibility. Everyone had eventually taken my side. Friends, parents, even people who barely knew us. But that support came with a strange echo. They wanted commentary. They wanted me to confirm that Tessa was the villain of the story, and I refused to play that role. Not because she had not wronged me, but because defining yourself against someone else keeps them in the room. And I had already asked her to leave. When people asked how I felt about her now, I said, "I wish her clarity." And that answer usually ended the conversation. The business reached a point where I had to make a decision: stay small and comfortable or grow into something demanding. I chose demanding, not out of greed, but out of curiosity. I wanted to see what I could build without emotional noise in the background. We expanded, new clients, new hires, new expectations, and I discovered something interesting. Leadership is easier when you are not constantly defending your reality. I trusted my judgment, and others trusted it too. One evening at a family dinner, my mother pulled me aside and said, "I am proud of how you handled everything. You never became bitter," and I laughed. and said, "Bitterness requires free time, and I am booked." Later that week, I ran into Tessa's sister at the grocery store. She looked uncomfortable, then relieved. She said quietly, "For what it is worth, we all know now." And I nodded, not asking for details. Truth has a way of surfacing without assistance. That night, I reflected on how close I had come to shrinking myself just to keep the peace. How easily a confident accusation can make a reasonable person doubt their own memory, and how dangerous that is. The experience had sharpened me, not hardened me. I was still kind, still open, but no longer negotiable about respect. I started dating again slowly, carefully, not chasing anything, just observing, listening, enjoying the simplicity of honesty. I noticed how different it felt when communication did not come with traps, when questions were questions and not tests, and I realized that what I lost was not a great love, it was a complicated silence, and what I gained was my voice, clear and unafraid. The past no longer knocked, and even if it did, I would not answer, because I had finally learned that peace is not something you negotiate for. It is something you choose, every single day. Time has a way of rearranging priorities without asking permission. By the third year after the divorce, my life had a rhythm that felt intentional. Mornings started early, not from anxiety, but from purpose. My calendar was full, but not chaotic, and my mind was quiet in a way that would have scared the old version of me. The business crossed a milestone I never expected, a buyout. Offer, serious numbers, polite lawyers, careful language. I did not rush it. I reviewed everything twice, not because I was afraid of losing, but because I had learned that patience is a form of power. When the deal closed, my parents came over with a bottle they had been saving. My dad raised his glass and said, "You turned a mess into a map," and that might be the best compliment I have ever received. Word traveled faster after that. Success always makes noise even when you do not, and with that noise came something familiar. Tessa tried again. Not directly, not dramatically. She sent a letter, handwritten, forwarded through someone who thought they were helping. I recognized her handwriting immediately. Tight, deliberate, controlled. I did not open it right away. I let it sit on the counter for 2 days, not out of indecision, but because I wanted to be sure that curiosity was not confusion. When I finally read it, the tone was different, softer, almost careful. She apologized without conditions, admitted she had been wrong, said she had lied to herself and others, said she was ready now, ready for honesty, ready for humility, ready for us. I folded the letter and placed it back in the envelope, not because it meant nothing, but because it meant too much. It confirmed everything I already knew. Growth that arrives only after consequences is still growth, but it does not rewind time. I wrote back one sentence. I said, "I am glad you found clarity. I wish you well. Please do not contact me again." And that was it. No explanations, no reopening of old doors. I mailed it and felt a quiet finality settle in. Later that week, I stood in my office after hours looking out at the city lights and thought about how many chances I had been offered to doubt myself, how many I had refused, and how that refusal had shaped everything that followed. I did not win because she lost. I won because I stopped arguing with someone who needed me to be wrong, and in doing so I gave myself permission to be right without needing witnesses. The suspense I once lived in had dissolved, replaced by something steadier and far more valuable: confidence without noise. Looking back now, the story feels almost simple, but living it was anything but. The moment that changed everything was not the accusation, not the divorce, not even the success. It was the decision to laugh at nonsense and refuse to carry it. That choice set the tone for everything that followed. Tessa needed me to agree with her version of events so she could live with hers, and I needed nothing from her except honesty. When those needs collided, only one of us was willing to walk away. People still ask me if I ever feel angry about how it ended, and I tell them the truth. Anger requires energy I now invest elsewhere. The business continues to grow, but more importantly, my life does too. Relationships are clear, conversations are direct, and silence is peaceful instead of tense. I learned that fairness is not weakness. It is strength without performance. Dividing everything evenly was not generosity. It was self-respect. Turning her away when she came back was not cruelty. It was consistency. The real suspense of my story was never whether she would admit the truth. It was whether I would betray myself while waiting for it. And I did not. That is the part one am proud of. Not the money, not the validation, but the moment I chose clarity over chaos. If there is a lesson here, it is this: you do not win by proving someone else wrong. You win by refusing to play a game that requires you to abandon your own reality. My life now is quiet in the best possible way, full without being loud, successful without being defensive, and honest without effort. And every so often when I open my laptop and see an email thread filled with nothing but work, I smile. because somewhere out there a very bad argument finally ran out of fuel, and I kept moving forward without looking back, head high, conscience clear, and future wide open.